Nobody ever notices the janitor. That was exactly why Jackson Reed chose this role. Disguised beneath a rain-slick black jacket, he stood at the entrance of the bank, unmoving. Raindrops ran down his sleeves, soaking into the frayed canvas strap of his bag. His eyes, sharp, unwavering, were fixed on the glass doors that separated him from the life inside. On the other side of that glass, Ara sat hunched behind the counter. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she counted stacks of bills. Her head bowed low, as if gravity itself bore down on her. Behind her stood a man in a tailored suit, his gaze stern and cold. It wasn't concern that tightened his jaw. It was control. Jackson's grip tightened around the strap. His fingers curled into the worn fabric like they were holding onto something far heavier than a bag. He didn't wait. He stepped forward. The doors whispered open. The cold air inside hit his face like a wall, heavier, thicker than the rain outside. No one turned to look. No one ever did. And that's exactly how Jackson planned it. He moved with purpose, every step measured, unhurried. Not because he needed to act the part, but because this was who he'd once been. His heart beat steady, but his mind roared, on fire with the weight of the past and the truth he refused to leave without. He remembered. He was 10, standing outside a diner in the biting wind, a paper-thin jacket offering no protection. Inside, through the steamed-up glass, he watched his mother weave between tables, wiping surfaces that already looked clean. Her hands, raw, red, cracked, never stopped moving. She never looked up. She never saw him. He didn't wave. He just watched, quiet, still, like a shadow carved into the sidewalk. People laughed, forks clinked. His mother worked. That image burned into him. Night after night she'd come out exhausted, and they'd walk home in silence. That silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the sound of sacrifice, unacknowledged and unending. From that boy's frozen toes and hollow stomach, a truth was born. If you want something to change, you don't wait for it. You rise and become it. So now, standing once more in front of glass doors, this time his own, Jackson didn't hesitate. He had cleaned those floors before. At 16, he'd rise before the city. His job? Wipe down the ATMs before the morning rush. It was mundane, repetitive. A wet cloth, cold fingers, and hours of silence. But Jackson had a different view of it. As he cleaned, he watched. Shoes passed by, shined leather, designer heels. Men and women in expensive suits strolled past him like he was invisible. But Jackson saw everything. He watched how they walked, how they spoke, how they looked at the world like it already belonged to them. He wasn't bitter. He was hungry. Each step they took into the bank was a line in the map he was drawing in his mind. One swipe at a time. In the mirrored surface of the ATM, he saw himself, not small, not weak, but waiting, patient, determined. People think cleaning is about removing dirt. Jackson knew better. It was about studying what was above you, until you understood it well enough to climb. Years later, he stood behind the very counter he used to mop in front of. His shirt was crisp, his name tag neat. A man stood across from him, yelling about fees, about service, about how things used to be better. Jackson said nothing at first. His hand pressed gently beneath the counter, fingers curling against the sharp edge of the wood. Pain reminded him he was still grounded. "I'm sorry, sir," he finally said, voice calm, even. "Let me fix that." He didn't need to defend himself. He wasn't the boy waiting in the cold anymore. He had learned to let anger pass through him like wind through a window, present but powerless. When the man left, Jackson didn't flinch. He didn't sigh. He just glanced at the red mark forming across his palm, then turned the page to the next customer file. His office was nothing grand, no trophies, no plaques, no show of power. Just one item on the wall, an old name badge, scratched, nearly unreadable. Jackson Reed, teller, framed, centered. not as a symbol of nostalgia, but as a compass, a reminder that his path wasn't paved by luck. It was earned, one silent morning at a time. People rarely noticed the badge. Fewer asked. Jackson never explained. He didn't need to. It wasn't for them. It was for the tellers still too afraid to ask for a break, for the janitors whose footsteps echoed unseen, for the kid wiping down ATMs while dreaming of glass ceilings to shatter. Jackson never forgot where he started, and he never led from above. He stood in meetings, speaking without slides, without stats. "Reports tell you numbers," he said once to a room full of executives. "But numbers lie." Silence. "A report won't tell you about the teller who hasn't taken a break in 6 hours because her manager leads through fear. It won't tell you how control replaces compassion." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I've been on the other side of that counter. I've felt what they won't say. So if we want the truth, we dig for it ourselves." And then he walked out. Not fast, not slow. Just steady. That evening, in the narrow hallway of a modest apartment, he removed his suit jacket and laid it down with care. His wife watched him from the doorway, eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. He said nothing as he pulled on a plain gray uniform. No logo, no name tag, just fabric. He tightened the belt, checked every fold, everything in place. Then he picked up the same old canvas bag. "No one notices the janitor," he said quietly. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Jackson moved to the door. His footsteps were firm. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't pretending. Today, he wasn't the CEO. He was the man who had never forgotten the floor. And inside that bank, no one would see him coming. He stepped through the glass doors again, and the air shifted. Thick, tense, almost electric. He moved slowly, pushing his mop cart like a soldier drawing a silent line across the battlefield. Heads stayed down. Screens glowed, forms shuffled. And behind the counter, Ara stood. Her shoulders were stiff. Her hands shook almost imperceptibly. But Jackson noticed, because he always noticed the ones no one else saw. He didn't need to assert authority. As Jackson passed through the lobby, heads instinctively bowed lower, like shadows shrinking beneath the weight of something unseen. He pushed the mop cart forward, silent and steady. His steps matched the rhythm of the place, slow, cautious, but not because of him. This rhythm belonged to someone else, a different force, a colder one, and Jackson could already feel its grip wrapping around the room. He knew who was behind it. He had seen that face before. But this moment wasn't his yet. Not now. Not while the room was still watching from the corner of its eyes, pretending not to. A sudden clatter cut through the silence. Coins slipped from Ara's trembling fingers. They scattered across the counter and tumbled to the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. Her shoulders jerked. Her breath shortened, shallow and rapid. Slowly, she crouched to collect them. But her hands were shaking too much, each movement clumsy, unstable, like her body was fighting its own instincts. Jackson didn't move. The mop paused in mid-stroke, a silent witness. Behind her, Halverson remained still, arms crossed, gaze fixed. He wasn't offering help. He wasn't saying a word. His presence alone was pressure. It loomed, it pressed, it watched, not to understand, but to command. Ara whispered something under her breath. Maybe an apology, maybe a prayer. Jackson couldn't hear, but her fingers kept fumbling, brushing coin after coin into her palm as if each one weighed 10 pounds. No one helped, not the tellers, not the customers, not even the manager standing just feet away. Everyone was watching and doing nothing. Jackson's hand flexed on the mop handle. The soft ping of coins on tile echoed through the room like drops in a deep well. And that's when Jackson saw it clearly. This wasn't an accident. This was fear manifesting as clumsiness. The body responding to pressure in the only way it knew how, by breaking down, bit by bit. Then Halverson moved. He didn't rush. His steps were deliberate, quiet. But with each step, the atmosphere thickened. Conversations died off mid-sentence. Fingers stopped typing. Phones lowered. Spines straightened. He said nothing, but his silence was louder than any command. And Jackson, from across the hall, didn't need to see his face. The shape of his shadow was enough. Long, heavy, dragging across the floor like it could crush anyone who stood too tall. Ara saw it too. Her posture changed immediately. She shrank, her shoulders folding inward like she was trying to disappear. Halverson paused beside her, not out of curiosity, but to remind her he didn't need to speak to dominate. Then, just as silently, he walked on. No words, no contact, just his presence lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. And still, no one moved. Jackson stood still, breathing slow. Halverson wasn't inspecting his staff. He was owning them, without chains, without orders. Just silence. And Jackson knew now. Control doesn't always shout. Sometimes it only watches. As he passed the breakroom door, Jackson's steps slowed. A sound stopped him, barely audible, fragile. Controlled crying, the kind trained to be hidden, not loud, not desperate, but restrained and buried deep, the way someone cries when they know nobody is coming to help. He didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. The door was cracked open just enough to let out a narrow strip of light. Inside, Ara sat at a table alone. Shoulders curled in, head lowered. Her body trembled in silence. There were no words, no support, just her and the weight of her breath, breaking in measured sobs she wouldn't allow to escape fully. Jackson kept walking. He didn't pause. His face didn't betray him. But inside, something shifted. This wasn't stress. This wasn't workload. This was something darker, more systemic, and it had been allowed to grow in plain sight. Jackson had lived under that shadow once. He remembered what it did to your spirit, to wake up every morning knowing your silence wasn't peace, but survival. Ara was back at her counter, a customer in front of her, impatient. Complaints about account numbers, delays. She answered everything with precision, tone gentle, face composed. But Jackson watched the disconnect. Her voice spoke service. Her eyes showed emptiness. It wasn't sadness. It was detachment. The practiced face of someone who'd repeated the same lines too many times to care if they were heard. Her fingers moved through forms with machine-like timing. But it wasn't about efficiency. It was about protection. This wasn't customer service. It was self-defense. She wasn't afraid of making a mistake. She was afraid of what came after one. Jackson didn't look at the customer. He didn't need to. The real dialogue wasn't happening in words. It was buried in every pause, every forced smile, every second too long between keystrokes. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then, one sudden jerk. The screen blinked red. Error. She flinched barely, but Jackson saw it. She reached to correct the mistake, but her breathing changed again. Chest rising faster, fingers less steady. The fear wasn't outside now. It was internal. Deep. A tightening spiral of panic masked behind controlled typing. She kept going. Error, correct, submit, error, again. On the surface, her body looked composed, but Jackson knew better. Her mind was elsewhere, now, somewhere locked behind years of pressure, somewhere that Jackson had once called home. Halverson stood at the far wall, arms crossed, silent, watching everything, everyone. His eyes swept across the room, not with interest, but calculation, measuring fear, not performance, not leading, controlling. People typed faster. Voices dropped, movements sharpened. There was no room for error, not while Halverson watched. And still, no one looked at him. But every single person felt him. And Jackson, without breaking stride, knew this. A leader doesn't need to be seen to be feared. But if fear is all a system runs on, it's already broken. Jackson kept wiping the floor, But his mind was no longer quiet. His thoughts sliced through the silence like broken glass. What he saw wasn't management. It was captivity. Halverson didn't lead. He controlled. And worse, no one dared to say it out loud, not even to themselves. Near the break room, Jackson paused, pretending to adjust his mop bucket. From behind the slightly cracked door, voices leaked out, soft, fractured, trembling. Ara's voice first, cracked and low. "If I don't do what he says, I'm gone." A moment of silence followed, then a second voice, softer, trying to offer comfort. "Miles," but his words were too quiet to catch. Ara answered again, even quieter, but Jackson heard the weight. He made it clear. There was no anger in her voice, no panic, just fatigue. The voice of someone who had already lost the argument inside themselves. Jackson clenched his jaw. He didn't need more context. That single sentence echoed in a space deep inside him. He'd heard it before, from others, from himself. Jackson moved on, slowly. Not yet. This moment wasn't the strike. But now the trap was exposed. Someone had built it with precision, and it thrived because no one had dared to fight it. Until now. As he resumed cleaning, his mop traced perfect, deliberate lines across the floor. But in his pocket, his fingers found what he had brought just in case. A recording device. No bigger than a house key, but heavy with intent. He crouched down under the pretense of wiping the baseboard and slipped it beneath the ledge of the side counter. A soft click. Active recording. Jackson rose, adjusted his sleeves, and returned to his task like nothing had changed. But everything had. The countdown had begun. Not for him, for Halverson. Now Jackson wasn't just observing. He was gathering every whispered order, every abuse hidden in quiet rooms, every threat delivered where no one was supposed to hear. Jackson would hear it all. Kenny stood near the printer, stacking papers that didn't need stacking. His hands moved too fast, eyes darting sideways. Jackson approached, mop gliding slowly like it had a mind of its own. Kenny whispered, barely audible. "He keeps her late." Jackson nodded subtly, keeping his rhythm. "Almost every night," Kenny added, voice tightening. Jackson glanced once, not to confirm, but to hold space, to allow truth to breathe. Kenny swallowed. "She's the only one." The stack of papers in his hands shook slightly. "He says it's training, special training." Jackson's fingers gripped the mop harder. Kenny lowered his gaze. "She doesn't complain. She can't." A pause. "None of us can." And then Kenny walked away, faster now, pretending again. Pretending he hadn't just cracked the silence. Jackson didn't follow. He stood there, mop still, absorbing it all. Training, late nights, isolation. The evidence was stacking, not in files, but in patterns, in pain. Kenny froze mid-step. Halverson appeared behind him like a ghost, quiet, sudden, dangerous. His shadow fell over the papers Kenny held. Jackson kept moving the mop, slow and steady, as though the ground hadn't just shifted beneath them. Halverson didn't speak. He watched. Kenny's breath caught. His hands trembled. Jackson made a slight movement, just a shift of the mop, keeping his face blank. Halverson stepped closer. His polished shoes stopped just inches from the wet floor. Still, silence. Jackson didn't break rhythm. One line of floor, over and over. Halverson stood longer this time, trying to read something in Jackson's stillness. Then, without warning, he turned and walked away. His footsteps sharp, slicing through the tension he left behind. Kenny exhaled. Quiet, rattled. No words passed between them, but everything had been said. Then it happened fast. Ara stumbled, reached for the counter but missed. Her knees gave out. Jackson dropped the mop. His arms caught her before she hit the ground. For a moment, neither of them moved. Her breathing, rapid and jagged. His, steady and calm. Then her eyes found his, just seconds, but enough. He saw it. Not just fear, not just exhaustion. Something deeper. Resignation, the kind that lives in people who've stopped believing anyone's coming to save them. She saw something in him, too, but didn't understand it. Yet. He held her steady until she could stand. Then she pulled away, gently, quietly, head down. Not a word. She returned to her station like nothing had happened. Jackson picked up the mop again. But now his thoughts weren't still. Ara wasn't just another teller. She was a mirror. And what she reflected was unbearable. Then Halverson's voice cut through the room. "Step back. Employees handle their own." Jackson didn't move. His hands stayed wrapped around the mop. His posture didn't shift. "I said step back," Halverson snapped again, louder now. Jackson looked up. Their eyes met for the first time. His was calm. Halverson's wavered. A moment passed, just long enough to make the silence heavier. Then Halverson scoffed and turned away. No more commands, just retreat. Jackson didn't smile. But inside, something cracked. Not fear, resistance. Halverson had seen him, not as a janitor, but as something else. And Jackson knew. Next time, there would be no words. The game had changed. He kept cleaning, watching, waiting. Fear shaped this place. It wasn't hidden. It was normalized. Every time Halverson crossed the floor, heads bowed, voices shrank, hands clutched tighter. No one looked at his face, but everyone avoided his shadow. From the edge of the lobby, Jackson saw the truth. This wasn't a bank. It was a prison of silence, and Halverson was the warden. The branch looked perfect from the outside. Polished counters, smiling employees, clean reports. But Jackson knew now, reports don't hear trembling hands. Spreadsheets don't track forced smiles. The real damage lived in people, and people don't ask for help when they think no one's listening. Outside, near the alley, Kenny found him. "Come with me," he whispered. Jackson followed. Behind the building, Kenny's hands were trembling again. His voice was raw. "She's trapped." Jackson stayed silent. "We've all seen it. No one says anything," Kenny added. Jackson waited. He makes her stay late, locks the doors, says it's extra training. A pause. She doesn't fight back anymore. Kenny looked up. No one can help her. His words weren't anger. They were surrender. And Jackson had seen too many good people give up. He looked back at the branch. For Kenny, it might already be too late. But not for her. "She's not alone," Jackson said. Kenny didn't believe it. Not yet. He walked away. Jackson stayed. The glass doors were only steps away, but he didn't move. He looked through them, at the staff, the fear, the system. It wasn't just policies or procedures. It was a machine built on silence, and people trapped inside it. Jackson's jaw tightened. His breath slowed. This wasn't a bad manager. This was a cage, and someone needed to break it. He adjusted the strap on his bag. His eyes sharpened. This wasn't a job anymore. It was a mission. He stood in the rain, staring through the glass. He saw her behind the counter. Too still, too quiet. He saw Halverson pacing like a predator. Jackson's hands curled at his sides. His voice came low, steady, quiet, but absolute. "I'm not leaving." No one heard him speak, but that didn't matter. Jackson wasn't speaking to them. He was speaking to himself. A vow, not a question. A quiet, irreversible decision carved from conviction. He took one last look through the glass, then turned, not away, but forward, back inside. Each step was deliberate, measured, final. He wasn't an observer anymore. He wasn't a visitor peeking into someone else's tragedy. Now he was inside it, and he wouldn't leave until he tore it down, piece by piece, no matter the cost. Inside, the atmosphere remained unchanged. On the surface, employees moved with routine precision. Customers waited, unaware. Jackson stepped to the side, near the row of waiting chairs. He sat down slowly, quietly. His mop leaned against the wall beside him like a prop in a forgotten play. No one noticed. Perfect. His eyes scanned the room. Focused, steady. Halverson moved near the counters, a silent storm in a sharp suit. Ara worked like a machine. Miles avoided eye contact like it burned. But Jackson wasn't watching them like a leader now. He was watching like a man counting seconds before detonation, because that's what this was. A countdown, and it had already begun. Halverson drifted toward Ara's station, his voice barely audible. "Keep working." She didn't pause, didn't question. Her hands moved faster. Jackson watched the tension coil in her shoulders. He saw how Halverson hovered, too close to ignore, not close enough to accuse. From the outside, it looked like management. Inside, it was something else. Pressure, dressed in professionalism. Command disguised as coaching. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. Her breath shallowed. Halverson stepped back. To anyone else, it was a manager checking in. To Jackson, it was the echo of something far darker. Ara kept working, but the woman behind the counter wasn't really there anymore. Her movements were flawless, but mechanical. Her smile, practiced. Her tone, empty. She wasn't processing accounts. She was surviving seconds. Jackson shifted slightly forward. Not yet, but almost. Her eyes were the tell, hollow, not from fatigue, but absence, not scared, not brave, just done. And that shook him. Because fear meant there was still something left to fight for. This was resignation. And Jackson had seen it before. He'd worn it. Years ago, behind his own counter, smiling on command, apologizing when ordered. Eyes that passed right through him. Cold. Dismissive. As if he were a fixture in the room, not a man with breath and blood and dreams. He remembered pretending it didn't matter. He remembered failing. Ara wasn't just a teller anymore. She was his reflection in a different uniform. And suddenly Jackson remembered why he came back. Not to observe. To end the cycle. He stood. No speech, no announcement. He walked forward. Silent, steady. Ara didn't see him at first. Not until he stopped at her counter. Her eyes lifted, weary and confused. Jackson leaned in. "Stand up." Her eyes widened. She glanced around. No one noticed. Halverson wasn't close enough yet. "Get up," Jackson repeated, softer but firmer. Something in his tone struck her, an anchor. Slowly, hesitantly, she pushed back from her chair. Her hands trembled. Jackson's face didn't shift. No anger, no fear, only certainty. She stood, and the moment changed. The air inside the branch shifted, almost imperceptible, but real. For the first time, Ara chose to move. Halverson turned. He moved fast, stepping between them, blocking Jackson's path. "Who are you?" Jackson stopped. Calm, silent. Then their eyes met. "I'm your CEO." The room collapsed into stillness. Halverson froze. Color drained from his face. His lips parted, but the words refused to. "Follow Jackson," didn't blink. "You've been working for me." Ara stood behind them, stunned. Halverson tried to recover, shifting his weight, reaching for false confidence. But Jackson didn't give him the chance. He pulled the recorder from his pocket, pressed play. Ara's voice filled the branch. "If I don't do what he says, I'm gone." It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. The weight of truth doesn't need volume. Halverson flinched. Jackson clicked it off. Silence, but a different kind now, heavier, unignorable. Halverson opened his mouth. Nothing. Jackson lowered the recorder. Calm, final. The sentence had already been passed. Not from Jackson, from the truth. Ara stepped back. Her knees gave out. She dropped to the floor, not from fear, but from release. Her body shook, not from terror, but from the sudden absence of it. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, and that silence said everything. Halverson stood frozen, smaller now, shriveled by truth. Not power, not title, just presence. He was no longer feared. He was irrelevant. Jackson turned to him. "You're done." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Truth doesn't shout. Halverson didn't respond. He couldn't. Jackson looked around the room. At Kenny. At Miles. At every quiet face that had stopped hoping. And then he said the words none of them had dared to believe. "No one here needs to bow their head again." Silence held. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was disbelief. Ara lifted her head. Kenny froze. Miles paused mid-task. The words didn't fall like commands. They landed like permission. Slowly, postures changed. Eyes lifted. Breath returned. Jackson didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The silence was already doing the work. Then he turned to Ara. She stood now, fragile but upright. He didn't step closer. He didn't comfort. He offered choice. You choose. Stay or walk away. For the first time, she wasn't being told what to do. This was hers. She didn't answer, not in words. She nodded. Small. Sure. And Jackson let that be enough. Behind him, Kenny moved first. Then Miles. Then others. One by one, each hand touched Jackson's shoulder, not to praise, to connect, to reclaim their place, together. Ara took one step, then another. Her legs still shook, but she walked. She stood in front of Jackson. Their eyes met. No fear, just hope, small, but real. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. He understood. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. Later, Jackson stood alone in the manager's office. The room empty now. But the silence was different. No tension, no fear, only quiet. A large map stretched across the wall. Red dots marked every branch. He stared. This wasn't just about her. This was a system, and it was broken everywhere. His hand reached toward the glass. One dot. Anywhere. Because they all mattered. He pressed his palm against it. This wasn't ambition. It was duty, purpose. Behind every dot, someone waited. Jackson Reed wasn't done. He wouldn't be done until every cage was broken. One story, one branch, one truth at a time, and he would find them. All of them. Outside, morning light spilled across the pavement. Jackson stepped out, face calm, step steady. Behind him, silence lingered. Not fear. Healing. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. It didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to them, and somewhere ahead, another story waited. Another voice trapped in silence. Jackson adjusted the strap on his bag and kept walking. No celebration, no victory. Just the next step. Because silence only ends when someone refuses to walk away.